Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, Editor-in-Chief of The Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders here on Sundays at 9 a.m. Rowan, this argument today, give the ABC millions more of your dollars and it's going to make us more patriotic, and overlook all those divisions. Discuss.
Well, Andrew, I'm just relieved that finally there's some genuine comedy on the ABC, and who would have thought, who would have guessed that it would come from Kim Williams himself. I think they should give him a show, a comedy show, a satire show, in which he goes on about the patriotism within the ABC. I mean, hilarious stuff. That he kept a straight face shows a great acting skill there that clearly the ABC should be developing. Or he genuinely believes what he said, in which case there is no hope for the ABC. For the simple reason that patriotism, and it's like all these words, racism, and we might discuss that in a second, but patriotism, you have to define the word before you start tossing it around willy-nilly. But patriotism is basically love of country. Love of your own country, not love of a historical country of 200 years ago, but love of your own country, love of the country you grew up in, with the values that your parents had, the values that your grandparents had and fought and died for. That's patriotism. Now, patriotism can go to extremes. You can have it the one extreme. I remember a few years ago, there were people wandering around with T-shirts that says, if you don't love it, leave it. So the idea there is if you don't love the country and every single facet of the country, then maybe you should rack off. That was one extreme version of patriotism. But I think the more mild or the more general and generous version of patriotism is, as I said, a love of the country and the culture that you are part of. Sure, it can always be improved. Sure, that's why we have politicians and politics and ideas of advancing and moving that culture and society forward. But it has to have a bedrock belief and love of the values that you were born into. And as on one part of my family, fifth generation Australian, I can say that the values that I was born into and that my ancestors died in the First World War for are not the values that the ABC respects. The ABC is all about shame. No. You cannot be a patriot if you're ashamed of your country. And the ABC is thoroughly ashamed of Australia that I grew up in.
Well said. Andrew. I mean, it has not been a uniting force. It's been a dividing one. But let's switch to one side of this division, right? And I know which side the ABC will be on. The personal abuse of Pauline Hanson in Parliament today. Was it out of order?
It was completely out of order, but not probably for the reasons that people are talking about, rudeness and carry on and all the rest of it. But it was out of order because it was so wrong. There is, as I said, the country that I grew up in, yes, it has had elements of racist, casual racism that I observed as a child and growing up as a teenager and an adult. I would call it casual racism. There was a well-known show in the 90s, Wogs Out of Work. There were insults and things, banter thrown around that used to be in the Larrikin Australia that I grew up, just part of the general kind of different cultures getting together and forging a new Australian culture. But the genuine racism I have only seen in the last 12 months. And that is real, aggressive, militant, vile racism. And it is directed against specifically and solely one section of the Australian community. And that is, of course, the hatred of Jews that we are seeing. We saw it on October 8th, 9th. We've seen it with people yelling out at the Opera House, where's the Jews, or gas the Jews, or whatever it was. We've seen cars in Wallara vandalised and smashed with Jew hatred spread over them. We've seen at Christmas, so it's not just the Jews that this particular mob are against, but also Christianity and Christian decorations at Myers. We've seen endless protests and antagonism to the point where the Jewish community no longer feels safe. Australian Jews no longer feel safe in this country, Andrew. There has never been in my entire life any segment of the Australian wonderful group of cultures and races and ethnicities that make up Australia. There has never been a single instance where any segment of the Australian society felt scared and afraid for their lives from other members of the Australian community. That has happened in the last 12 months, and it has happened exclusively from one group of individuals who are aggressively have an aggressive hatred of Jews, and they are taking it to the streets And they're the only way any parliamentarian should be standing up and attacking the word racism in Australia is to condemn the disgraceful anti-Semitism we have seen week in and week out for 12 months. That is racism. It makes every Australian sick to the stomach. And I won't hear a word from any of our political members of parliament if they are not prepared to first and foremost condemn that racism outright, Andrew.
Look, so true, so true. I must say that, you know, I think the previous example that I would go to, the racism against Chinese on the goldfields, and boy, oh boy, how long ago is that? Rowan Dean, thank you so much indeed for your time.